Hello, I'm Kent Millard, Senior Pastor at First United Methodist Church. In 1989, South Dakota celebrated its 100th birthday, its centennial. In 1989, First United Methodist Church celebrated its 118th anniversary as a congregation. In the letter to the Hebrews, we read these words, "Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely and run with perseverance the race that is set before us." The author of the letter of Hebrews tells us that when we look to that cloud of witnesses, that is, those persons from the past who have been faithful to God in their time, we're inspired to be faithful to God in our time. In this video, you'll see pictures and hear the story of many people who have been faithful to God in their own time and place in the past. I hope you find it inspiring so that you might be more faithful to God in this time and place. Thank you for tuning into this video, and we hope you enjoy it.
The first record of a Methodist preacher being in this part of the country was in August 1860, when the Reverend G.E. Clifford, presiding elder of the Upper Iowa Conference, a position we now call district superintendent, appointed young Septimus W. Ingham to cover, quote, all the territory lying between the Missouri River and the Big Sioux River. Reverend Ingham was 23 years old. He crossed the Big Sioux River on horseback on October 12, 1860, and started out to learn about his domain. Nearly all the settlers near Sioux City were French Canadians, primarily Roman Catholic, so by the time he reached Vermilion, he was pretty discouraged. He spent the night at Mulholland's Tavern there, and when he asked to pay his bill in the morning, he found it was for $1. He only had 90 cents. So had to put the rest on credit and agreed to pay it when he received his missionary allowance. Unfortunately, Reverend Clifford discovered that his request for missionary allowance for Ingham had not reached the New York office in time, and there was no missionary allowance. Clifford took $30 from his own salary, a little bit here and a little bit there from other ministers' wages, and raised $130 for Reverend Ingham. That was his pay for the year. On October 14th, 1860, Reverend Ingham preached the first sermon by a Methodist minister in this area. He used as his text Romans, the first chapter, the 16th verse. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth." Reverend Ingham stayed 2 years in this area and formed the first class of any religious organization in the area. Remember, this was before even Dakota Territory had been formed. It was said that as the settlers moved west, every time the settlers chopped down trees to form their settlement, there was a Methodist minister to climb up on that stump and preach a sermon. By 1861, Dakota Territory had been formed, and by the following year, there was a small community in Sioux Falls City started by two development companies, the Western Town Company of Dubuque, Iowa, and the Dakota Land Company out of St. Paul, Minnesota. People began trickling into the small city, but in 1862, just a year later, there was an Indian uprising in Minnesota which spilled over into Dakota Territory. And on August 1862, Judge Amadon and his son were killed up near the site of the penitentiary. Following this, the governor of Dakota Territory ordered that all settlers in the small town be evacuated, and they all went to the fort at Yankton, so there was no one left in the city. At the end of the Civil War in 1865, an Army regiment was assigned to Sioux Falls and Fort Dakota built to protect the people, and settlers began to trickle back into the area. But because homesteaders could not claim military land, the fort was disbanded in 1869, and the little community began to grow rapidly. we have a precious handwritten account of the formation of the First Methodist class, quote, in the old Army barracks in 1871 with Brother C.V. Booth as class leader. At the request of the minister in 1897, Mrs. Booth wrote these notes on notepaper carefully sewn together at the top with a bit of blue thread. This early history is carefully preserved in our written history book in our archives and history room. Reverend Thomas Cuthbert, an English local preacher, was assigned to this new group of Methodists in 1871. He and his family lived in a part dugout, part sod house east of the city near the fairgrounds on the Clark Coates farm. We know this area today as the Bel Air area, north of 26th Street, between Cliff Avenue and the interstate. Reverend Cuthbert, a native of Yorkshire, England, would preach at Sioux Falls in the morning. Early reports show, quote, when he could ford the river. He would then ride an Indian pony to Canton and preach there in the evening. He also served Hudson, Beloit, and Elk Point in his charge as a circuit rider. His son Arthur was here when we had our 75th anniversary, and he told of some of the stories he remembered, some of the things that he remembered from the early days in the little sod house, part dugout hut. He remembered that his mother's hair would freeze to the pillows in the morning because of the draftiness of the little hut and the wind blowing in the wintertime. He told about when his mother had brought her lovely Haviland china with her from England, and there was no place to put it, so her husband built a wooden shelf up on the walls of the sod shanty. And in the spring, the rains came and the floods came and the shelf went down and all of Mrs. Cuthbert's fine Haviland china was lost. Arthur also told the story of his father going to Canton to perform a wedding in the wintertime. He ran alongside the sled in order to keep his feet from freezing, got to Canton all right, performed the wedding, and then discovered that the groom had no money with which to pay him. He did give him a sack of potatoes, and on the way home in the 25-degree below zero cold, the potatoes froze solid. Arthur told of being able to remember the sound of those potatoes as they rolled out onto the floor when his father brought them home, and they were frozen. But through the winter, they were glad to have them, as they were the only potatoes they had. The Reverend Cuthbert stayed only 1 year in the Sioux Falls area, and then he served churches in the Upper Iowa Conference, but they stayed close with their ties to the Sioux Falls Church. And he and his wife in their later years lived in Canton with a daughter. When he died, both Reverend Cuthbert and his wife were buried at Mount Pleasant Cemetery. The church has placed there a marble gravestone mounted with the official brass plaque of a Methodist circuit rider. In the summer of 1987, Reverend Cuthbert's great-granddaughter and great-great-grandson visited his grave. By 1873, this small group of Methodists had decided that they needed a place to meet, so they took advantage of an offer by Mrs. Louisa Gale for lot on which to build something, provided the Methodist men would build it. Mrs. Gale was the wife of one of the original founders of the city, Artemus Gale, and for many years the area east of Phillips Avenue and about south of 12th Street was known as Galesburg. Mrs. Gale gave them a lot on which they could build a building between 11th Street and 12th Street on the west side of First Avenue. They built a small building, 18 by 26. It was not really a church, it was a meeting house and also a home for the pastor. Population of the city that year was 593. Articles of incorporation were drawn up on July 31st, 1875, and we had an official First Methodist Episcopal Church of Sioux Falls. The church membership was 84. This is the handwritten book containing the Articles of Incorporation. On April 18th, 1884, the Women's Foreign Missionary Society was formed by 13 ladies. Later on, the Ladies' Aid was formed, and then the Women's Home Missionary Society. They had 3 organizations. The ladies were busy. By now, the congregation was beginning to feel the need of a real church building. So they offered to purchase 2 lots from Dr. Phillips on the corner of 11th and Main, across the street from what is now Washington High School, and is now known as where the building is now known as 11th and Main. They offered Dr. Phillips $200, but it took a while for them to raise that amount. They finally raised $200.10, and the 10 cents it's recorded was returned back to the Treasury. The building was to be, according to the minutes, quote, not less than $3,000. And they started and finished only the basement part of the building first. Because of the lack of transportation of goods and material, the railroads were not yet into Sioux Falls. They either had to transport the materials from Worthington, Minnesota, or Sibley, Iowa. It was slow going, and the church was not finished until 1880. Part of the money had come from the school board, who had rented their original building at $6 a month. This helped them to raise the $200. The minister was Reverend William Fielder, known as the boy preacher, and it was said he could be seen going about the city collecting for 3 different projects, one for the church, one for the church chairs, and one for the bell. Citizens of the town helped out with contributions for the bell, and by mutual agreement, the Methodists, the Congregationalists, and the Episcopalians held their services all at the same hour, and the Methodist bell rang out to call all worshipers to their respective churches, as well as being the only way to alert the volunteer firemen during a fire. This picture shows the first church with Old Central High School across the street, which preceded Washington High. By 1880, they had decided to build a parsonage next door south of the church, and to that end put in footings and gathered materials so the parsonage could be built in the spring. But that winter, 1880-81, was one of almost constant snowstorms from the middle of October until April. When the snow finally melted and the river broke up in the spring, the raging flood that roared through town washed away the footings and material for the new parsonage, as well as both the bridges that crossed the river. But, Mrs. Booth records, not being discouraged, it was tried again with success. Our founders had survived Indian raids, drought, grasshoppers, hard times, isolation, snow, and flood. They were here to stay. In later years, the old church became a blacksmith shop, as portrayed in this picture. Reverend Fielder went on to become presiding elder, served churches in the western part of the state, and became the founder of Dakota Wesleyan University, and later a seminary president. By 1890, it was felt that a new church was needed. By then, the membership was 185, the city population 10,177, and South Dakota was a brand new state. $3,283.10 was paid for lots on the southwest corner of 11th Street and Minnesota Avenue, diagonally across from the present YMCA and at the site of the present Firestone store. A parsonage was built on 11th Street directly west of the church. In 1895, the Reverend William H. Jordan was assigned to the church, and he was such a popular speaker and recruited so many new members that by 1902, the congregation had to expand the church to nearly double the seating. Note that the entry is now at the back of the building instead of on the corner as it was originally. The sanctuary was turned around so the congregation faced north instead of south. The newly enlarged sanctuary looked like this. Reverend Jordan later became a district superintendent and organized the Jordan Methodist Church, which we now know as Wesley United Methodist Church. This is the way the city looked in 1912 when the population was 14,094. Membership in First Church was 694, and more room was needed again, so the congregation began planning for a third building to be built on the southwest corner of 12th Street and Spring Avenue, where it still is today. The Judge Aiken property was purchased, which included a 10-room house and a barn. The house faced 12th Street and was moved to face Spring Avenue and was in approximately the location of where the chapel now is. And it was used as a parsonage and then Sunday school rooms for many years. The old house was later moved and is now at 3915 South Hawthorne Avenue and is an antique store. When the old church was sold at auction and was bought by Frank T. Williams of the Williams Piano Company, a member of the Board of Trustees, who then sold what he could and gave away the rest of the materials. At this time, we lost track of the bell, and though we have searched diligently, it has never been located. When this third church building was in the process, Grandma Lizzie Thomas, who was then in her 80s, wanted to do something special for her new church. She had attended church at the first building on First Avenue, had been at both the first and last services of the two church buildings. She could easily have said to herself, "I've done my share, let someone else build another church." Instead, she conceived the idea of taking strips of cardboard, cutting slits in them, and asking everyone she knew to fill the slits with pennies, thus asking each one for a foot of pennies. In this manner, she collected 12,500 pennies, and this money went toward the purchase of the stained glass window in the south of the sanctuary, the Christ in Gethsemane window. When this building was dedicated, the Daily Argus leader editorialized, "The new edifice stands as another striking reminder of the importance of religious work. Certainly if the people who worship in that place, none of whom can be reckoned as a millionaire, have been taking the pain and been willing to make the sacrifice needed to erect such a building, there must be something in what they believe after all. To place such a fully equipped plant in the very heart of the city at great cost for both building and maintenance calls attention to the abiding fact that there are certain truths, certain principles, certain fundamental motives of conduct that are worthwhile, and which it is the mission of the churches to emphasize for the betterment of human life." In the new church, the pulpit was in the center of the platform, and the organ console was also in the center of the choir loft, with the altar rail being one continuous piece. For many years, opening exercises of the Sunday school were held before persons present went to their respective classes. A church school orchestra played for these opening exercises, and rousing singing was also part of it. Large wooden folding doors could be drawn to block off the back part of the sanctuary, and wooden folding chairs filled the back area, while the very back were cubbyhole classrooms. One of the early organists was a man by the name of John Downer Hazen. He was also the choir leader. He was a real friend of boys in the community because he had been a friend of Ernest Thompson Seton, who started the Boy Scout movement. When he died, Mr. Hazen left in his will money to be used to purchase a statue of David to be placed in McKinnon Park. But the city was reluctant to place a nude statue in the park that children frequented, albeit it was a masterpiece of Michelangelo. So the city preserved the money for a while and eventually used it to build an addition to the Pettigrew home, which is now part of the Pettigrew Museum. On May 10th, 1939, 3 bishops shook hands in Kansas City, and the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church South, and the Methodist Protestant Church became one. The Methodists became the Methodist Church. The Methodists are one people, the bishops declared. At this time, the 3 women's societies became the Women's Society of Christian Service. When we celebrated our 75th anniversary in 1947, Reverend Arthur Cuthbert, son of our founding minister, and Reverend Fred Hanscom, son of the Reverend L. Hanscom, who had been instrumental in building the second church building, were both here to reminisce. Bishop Ralph Cushman of the St. Paul area was the anniversary preacher. Dr. John V. Madison was the minister at the time. My mother, Mrs. Calla Yeager Grow, compiled the history for the 75th anniversary brochure, and we are much indebted to her for the recording of the early history that we now know. There had been a gymnasium in the church when it was built in 1913, and it had been used extensively for basketball, volleyball, scout meetings, and so forth, but it was decided in 1952 that we needed more room. The floor of the gym was raised to provide for what has been known as the social hall and is now the choir room. Parking was becoming an increasing problem, so property east of the church across the street was secured. For a time, the old houses on the property were used for church school classes and later torn down to make the entire area into parking. By 1956, crowded church school classes were meeting in the old kitchen, in storerooms, and everywhere a spot could be found. And it was decided to expand our facilities, so a new educational wing, offices, and chapel were added. The beautiful stained glass windows in the chapel are all memorials. The large one at the entrance is the Corabelle Winterstein window. Another part of the expansion at this time was the inclusion of a library for the first time as part of the office complex. Reverend Henry Lewis was senior minister with Reverend George Whithouse, his associate. The fund drive for the new unit was so successful that we went on to raise an additional $50,000 toward the building of a new high school in La Paz, Bolivia. By the time that building was completed, Dr. Arnold Herbst was senior pastor, and he and Mrs. Herbst went to Bolivia for the dedication of this new school. This picture shows Dr. Herbst with the president of Bolivia on the platform at the dedication. This church has always been mission-minded. We have helped with the establishment of other Methodist churches within the city, with Asbury Church in 1950, Hilltop Church in 1958, and Sunnycrest in 1965, and we are looking forward now to the establishment of a 6th Methodist church in the area in southeastern Sioux Falls. A section of neighborhood organization was formed in 1959, and it became a very important part of the church. The whole congregation was divided up into 18 sections and approximately 150 neighborhoods, and each neighborhood leader then was asked to care for the persons in that particular neighborhood. And it was at this time that we had the largest growth in membership, when each one was caring for their own neighbor. During the winter, we had dinners on following church on Sunday that included probably 2 or 3 sections at a time, and this was a time of good fellowship. Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church united to become the United Methodist Church. The symbol of the cross and the flame was adopted, and the Women's Society of Christian Service became United Methodist Women. Women's organizations not only helped with the local budget, but were always involved with support of missions, both financially and in educating women to the mission need. By 1969-1970, quote, the house, which we owned just west of the church on Duluth Avenue, became a meeting place for our youth. And in 1970, the United Daycare Center was started by Bonnie Messer, wife of Assistant Pastor Don Messer. We celebrated our centennial in 1971 with numerous events. By now, the membership was 3,026, and the city population, 72,488. We had a fine arts show in which several members presented original paintings. A hymn contest for words appropriate to the centennial theme was won by Reverend John DeVries, assistant pastor. An organ piano concert by organist Dennis Hochhalter and Ellen Meiskens, wife of music minister Sam Meiskens. A logo contest which was won by Sally Baumann, our educational assistant. And a presentation of a musical, Noah's Flood, by Benjamin Britten, under the direction of Reverend Sam Meiskens. The culmination was an all-church dinner at the arena. A long-time dream was realized in 1976 when an addition was made to the north of the building to include a north lobby entrance, move the library upstairs, and install an elevator. Today, as we near the end of 1989, we have already completed an addition to the building which adds a multipurpose room, new kitchen, heating plant, addition to the library, restrooms, and 5 new classrooms, beside a new daycare room. A new organ is in the process of being built by John Nordley, local organ builder. This will replace the original Moeller organ, which was installed in 1913 when the present building was built and was a gift of the L.D. Manchester family. When the new organ is installed, the front of the sanctuary will be redone, once more putting the organ console and the pulpit in the center as it originally was, allowing for more space around the altar area and access to an enlarged choir loft from the floor of the sanctuary. The entire project is estimated to cost in excess of $1.2 million. Additional parking has been secured to the north and west of the church, and negotiations continue for additional parking space, an ever-increasing need. Throughout the years, participation in small groups has been an important part of church life. From the three ladies' organizations, now United Methodist Women, Men's Brotherhood, Baraka Class, to church school groups, the Rowland Bible Class, the Phalathia Matrons, the Tuckabacks, the Epworth League, now the UMYF, Elsie Wolf Mission Guild, to couples groups, Triple N, Come Double, Wedded Band, Expanders, the group, singles groups, and so forth. There is an opportunity for everyone to be involved. We now have 9 choirs, which includes 4 bell choirs and a very active music program, including choir concerts and programs such as The Night on Broadway. Our youth are involved in special activities as well as their regular meetings. Confirmation classes include a week at Lake Poncet for Heritage Journey experience. Senior high youth alternate a worship caravan and a workshop caravan each summer. This past summer, Reverend Richard Coleman, our minister of music, exchanged pulpits with the Reverend Robert Amos from England. Reverend Amos is a Yorkshire man, as was our founder, Reverend Thomas Cuthbert, which seems to have brought us full circle. Our staff today includes Dr. Kent Millard, senior pastor, Reverend Richard Coleman, minister of music, Reverend Darrell Leach, minister of youth, and 2 part-time ministers, Reverend Richard Moberly and Reverend Earl Butts, with Redetta Bury in charge of children's ministries.
Well, friends, now you know something of what God has been doing through people called United Methodists here at First United Methodist Church in Sioux Falls since 1871. We hope that through watching this video you have been inspired by those in the past who have been faithful in their time to be faithful in your time. Today in 1989, we have 2,150 members in the congregation, an average attendance of about 750 on each Sunday morning, and growing. During this past year, we've received 130 new members, and Sioux Falls is growing. There's over 100,000 people now resident in the city of Sioux Falls. I hope that this video has been a source of inspiration to you, and that you'll want to be more faithful to God because you have seen how others in the past have been faithful to God. Let's conclude this video with these words from the letter to the Hebrews, which says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses in this congregation, and therefore we too should lay aside every weight or sin that holds us down and run with perseverance the race set before us, keeping our eyes upon Jesus the Christ, who came and lived and died and rose again and lives among us today to bring us new life. Thank you for watching this video. May God bless you.